Hey, Nikki here with Beauty J'adore. So I finally got around to uploading my tutorial for my pattern that came out last month, which is McCall's M7580. Now this pattern or this tutorial is not for the pants. It's simply for the top. I'm going to do the pants, but I'm going to do the pants in a couple weeks because when I upload the pants, I want to do an altered pant. So I want to do something that's a bit more fitted, flare leg. But anyway, so we're talking about the top. So this top is very special to me. A couple reasons. When I first started this whole process with McCalls, I said I wanted to design patterns that were easy for people that had never had any experience sewing to make. So something that was fashion forward, but not completely overwhelming. And I think this pattern kind of fits the bill with that. In addition, I wanted to make this top that will easily convert to a dress. And in fact, someone actually tagged me on Instagram. Then she made it into a dress. I was looking for her information. I couldn't find it. So if you're watching this, please resend me a picture. So I want to take a look at it again, if you don't mind. So again, back to this pattern. I think it is really easy. I think when I made it, a friend of mine, I kind of walked a friend of mine through this as well. She made it and she had no experience sewing, and she made it in, I want to say 3 hours or so, give or take. So yeah, so it's an easy pattern to fit. It's an easy pattern to wear. It's comfortable. And it's just really pretty. You get the right fabric and it can be a fantastic dress as well. So according to the instructions, you can use a gabardine, crepe, black satin, yada yada, cotton blend, but you can also use a silk. I think a silk in a dress would be absolutely beautiful. It'll put a different dimension to the top. But it would be beautiful with silk as well. You know, pretty much any fabric will work with the exception of a stretch, some type of stretch fabric. If you do decide to use stretch, I would definitely size down. It's already kind of a baggier top. It's not designed to fit snugly. But if you do decide to use a stretch, just make sure you size down tremendously. In fact, I think I cut an 8 and it's still, you know, a bit boxy on me, which I wanted it that way. That's kind of the way that I wanted the design to come out, a bit boxier, because it'll look great with even tucked in with jeans or tucked in with pants. It would make a really great piece that way. But this is my first time doing a tutorial as well. Just a little FYI. I've done them for friends and family, but I've never taken the time to upload them. Because let's just be honest, it's a lot of work doing it. It is. You know, it was time consuming. Not the whole process of doing the tutorial, but then kind of editing it and taking out all the stuff that would make it crazy long. So if you have any questions, any comments, something that you think I left out, just leave me a comment, shoot me over an email, whatever works best. But I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you're able to follow it. And I would love to see the finished product. So if you can shoot me over, whether you're tagging me on Instagram, tagging me on Facebook, or shooting a picture over, I'd love to see them. So happy sewing, you guys. Okay, so I have all of my pattern pieces cut out and I've already gone ahead and marked them as well. So there's quite a few markings that you need to make note of on this particular pattern. Of course, you have the neck markings, you have the bust markings as well. And I don't believe I did this one. So you have the neck markings, you have the bust, and you have tons of pleats. Just pay attention when you're marking the pleats that you're marking in the proper direction. So it's letting you know that these pleats, the arrow is pointing in. So it's letting you know that when you fold this, that it's going to be a box pleat. Like so, if you could see that. So it's pretty much going to be folded in this way and folded in this way. if you can see that. So that's how it's going to look. So when you're making your markings, what I typically do is I mark these two lines, and then I just put an X where you see these arrows, because that's going to let me know that I'm folding it in, and then it's going to meet up in this particular space here. So, but once we get to that part, in terms of pinning it before we sew it, I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. So you want to go ahead and do all of your markings if you haven't already done so. And it's 8 pieces. So it's 1 through 8. Yeah, and they're pretty large pieces, so it's not a bunch of cumbersome pieces. These are your only small pieces, which is your neck facing and your back facing. And so I've gone ahead as well and interfaced the front and the back pieces. So what I typically do at this point is I take mine to the serger, and I go ahead and I serge my edges. That way, once I construct it, everything's already done. I may have to go through and serge maybe 1 or 2 more places, but for the most part, it's already done. If you don't have a serger, not an issue at all. You don't need one. It's not going to interfere with how your garment is constructed. I simply like to do it because it just looks nicer inside. So I'm going to go ahead and clean my edges up, and I'll be right back. So now that you have your edges cleaned up, what you want to do is go ahead and pin all your darts and your pleating. So but what you want to do is you want to leave out the upper half of the sleeve. So it's going to be 4 of these pieces. So you want to leave these out for last. So here's the bottom part of the sleeve. And so earlier I mentioned when you mark them, you want to mark them with the X in each corner, and that's the direction that you're actually turning the pleat into. And what I mean by that is you're going to take this edge and you're going to turn it over, and you're going to go ahead and pin it. So you want to turn it in the direction of the corner of the X. You can go ahead and put 2 pins if you like. Once we get finished with this, we're going to go ahead and iron it, and it'll be a lot easier to work with. So you want to just pin it over and do the same thing here. Okay, so once you have everything pinned, you want to go ahead and iron it down just so that it'll help you stitch it a bit better. And then you want to take it to your machine and you want to go ahead and stitch this. When you're sewing the bottom part of the sleeve, you want to make sure that you're just using a basting stitch and you stitch right on the edge here, because this is simply to hold it down. And I did take it to the iron just so that it could get a little flatter, you see. But once you iron it after you sew it together, it's going to iron really nicely. So it's basically just to hold these pleats in place. Now with the other parts, now that's just for the pleating and that's just for the sleeve, but for everything else you want to use a regular stitch. And again, I'm just sewing this just to kind of tack this down. And if you notice here, I'm right on the edge. Okay, so after you stitch the darts and the pleats, you want to go ahead and you want to iron the pleats and the darts, making sure that, especially with the front, that when you iron it in the down direction. So this is the wrong side, just so that you can see. This is the right side. And here's the right side of the bottom of the sleeve, this portion right here. So ironing is very important as you go along. It just makes it look a lot nicer when it's all said and done. And this is the back. This is the wrong side of the back. So with the wrong side, you want to iron away from the inner seam. So this is the back seam. You want to iron away from that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and do the zipper. So you want to put these two, the back pieces, right sides together. And I'm using a 9-inch zipper. So when you did all your markings, there should be another marking. I don't typically do that marking only because I know what my 9-inch zipper looks like. So let's go ahead and we're going to pin the two right sides together. And clearly I use tons of pins just so that it doesn't shift and it's nice and neat. And for me, because I don't use the hook and eye, and I know that the pattern calls for this little hook and eye. I don't, if you could see that, it's kind of light, but it's this right here. I don't typically use this just because I like to have my zippers go all the way to the neck and not have to use any type of clasping. But I know most people do like to have that ability to kind of, you know, hook it at the back. So the pattern does call for hook and eye. If you want to go ahead and do that, just follow the instructions on the pattern. If not, what I do is I measure pretty much. I just kind of put it here and I measure down where I want my zipper to stop. About here or so. I put an additional pin because this tells me I need to baste from here to here and then stitch from here to here. So what you want to do is take it over to your machine and you want to stitch the back seam. Your back seam. The pattern calls pretty much all the way around, with the exception of the darts and the pleats and all that, a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Sometimes I use a bit less than that. It just depends on the pattern. A lot of times, well, most times, I'll cut a larger pattern than I need. That way it gives you kind of some wiggle room, because if you cut it the size that you think you are automatically, and it's too small, you have no recourse. There's nothing you can do. And let's just be honest, sometimes the patterns aren't always as accurate as humanly possible because all of our bodies are completely different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to baste from the top down to where I actually marked it. So I'm going to go ahead and hand base stitch this real quickly. And what you want to do when you're base stitching this is you want to go really close to the edge. If you could see this. And it is a bit more time consuming than just kind of like doing that tape thing, taping the zipper down and then attaching it. But this just looks so much nicer to me. It's so much neater. And don't worry about what the stitches will look like because we are going to pull these out. And the reason I like to do it by hand is because we don't need a lot. We just basically need the ability to securely hold it in place. Okay, so we have the base stitching done. And what you want to do is you want to go ahead and take it over to your machine and you want to stitch as close as possible without damaging the actual coils, but you want to stitch as close as possible to the zipper. Okay, you want to go ahead and stitch on both sides. All the way down. And flip this over and stitch this side. And making sure, because you're so close to this edge, making sure that as you're going, you're kind of feeling underneath to ensure that you're not stitching through the actual fabric that shouldn't be stitched through. Alright, so go to the top, double stitch there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up the seam. Just using your seam ripper, just go ahead and open this up. Not all the way down quite yet, but just, and then just enough for your zipper to go down. I personally don't like sewing on top of my zipper, only because I've ruined a few needles doing that. So just continue to again as close as you can, and then you're going to do the other side as well. Okay, so now what you want to do is you want to go and clip all these strands, take out the basting stitch, and then we're going to go to the iron. And we're going to iron this open. So if you see this, we're going to take out all the basting stitch, And then we're going to completely iron this open flat because we're going to, again, sew deep into this crevice without actually hitting the coils. Okay, so now that our zipper is nicely installed, we want to then work on the front half. So we can set this to the side. So what we want to do is we want to take the front bottom half and connect the top. Okay, so what you want to do is put right sides together. You want to pin them. And they should match up perfectly. All right, so take this over to your machine and attach that. Okay, so now after you attach the top of the bodice to the bottom, what you want to do is just iron the seam allowance down flat. Now you want to take the back and connect it to the front with right sides together. You want to go ahead and match up the side seams. And go ahead and stitch the back to the front on both sides, from underneath the arm down to the bottom. Okay, so you have the front connected to the back. You want to go ahead and iron your seam allowance open. And this is also a good time to check for your fit, because the next step is we're going to put the sleeves on. And if you put the sleeves on and you find out it's a little too snug or a little too big, then you have to take everything undone. So try it on right now to see how the fit is. If you need to take it in some, do so. If you need to take it out a bit, do that as well. All right, so now let's go ahead and work on the sleeves. So the sleeves are done a bit differently than normal sleeves. So what happens is you usually do your markings on the wrong side of the fabric. But what I do is I do the markings on the wrong side, and it kind of transfers over to the right side, just kind of like the dots. Because even if you look at the instructions, it's going to tell you how to construct the pleats based on working on the right side of the fabric. So if you take a look, the diagram is based off of the right side of the fabric. If you attempt to do this on the wrong side of the fabric, you will be thoroughly confused, because it's a cinch when you're working on the right side of the fabric. So if you take a look, and even if you need to go ahead and kind of darken this on the right side using your paper, do that. I can see mine, so I don't need to do it. But if you need to, you know, it washes out, or you can just take a damp cloth and get it out. So what you want to do is, here is the box, and then here's the X's kind of right here. I hope you can see this well enough. But what you want to do is you want to think of this just as a box pleat. So you want to take this one side over here, fold it in to this side, and then pin it. You want to pin it at the top and the bottom. And then you want to take the other side and do the same thing. But what's really important is that you want to match both sides up to one another. You want them to be touching. You see how that is? Now, if you turn it over and if you're following the diagram from the wrong side of the fabric, see how it's completely, you will be lost. It won't do it the proper way. So make sure that you do your markings on this side, but kind of roll the pin hard enough so that it transfers the dots over here. If that makes sense, I hope so. So we want to do this again. You want to match this up here. You want to go ahead and pin it. And you want to pin the bottom and do the same thing. Let's move those over. And again, you want them to touch. So I guess it's pretty easy, but it's a little more complicated than the normal pleats. But it just makes it look so much better. All right, so let's... So what you want to do is go ahead and do all the pleats. So there's going to be 4 sides that you need to do it. So it's going to be a front and a back to each side. So let's go ahead and get that done. Okay, see this? So what we'll do, I'll just go ahead and show you how to do this one, and then I'm going to finish the other sleeve. But just go ahead and take this over to your iron, and you want to make sure you iron them completely flat, because when we go to sew them, we're going to sew them like we did the bottom half. Simply a basting stitch at the very bottom. Okay, so you have your bottom half of the sleeve and your top half of the sleeve nicely pleated and pressed. So what you want to do now is connect the bottom half to the top half of the sleeve. So with right sides together, you want to stitch this long edge, and you should have the darts, your notches here. So you want to stitch this side and this side using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to go ahead and take this to the machine and stitch these. Once you're done stitching these, go ahead and press your seam allowance open. So we have our upper sleeve constructed. So now what we want to do is take our lower sleeve, go ahead, take it over to the machine, stitch the side seam using a 5/8 inch seam allowance, then press the seam open. Okay, so we have the bottom sleeve constructed as well. So now the next step is we're going to go ahead and connect the top sleeve to the bottom. So we're going to turn this inside out. Match up the seam allowance. And then pin this all the way around. So we're going to pin both of them and then take it over to the machine and we're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so we've sewn the top to the bottom, and what you want to do once you sew it is just press the seam allowance. Some people want to cut theirs, but because I already finished mine inside, and I don't mind like a thicker seam allowance, only because a lot of times I do need the extra seam allowance if I give it away to a friend or family member and I want to make some adjustments to it. So I usually keep a lot of my seam allowance as opposed to cutting it off. So, but you are free to go ahead and trim your seam allowance and press it in a downward motion toward the hem of the sleeve. So once you've done that, you want to go ahead and we're going to attach the sleeve to the top. So we want to turn this inside out. So you want to do this with right size matching. Where are we here? Oh. So you want to put the sleeve inside. And just so the seams are matching up properly, you want to go ahead and I like to match mine up exactly just so that it's not off. All right, we'll go ahead and pin this. And match up the back here with the other side of the sleeve. Just make sure when you're doing the sleeves and attaching them to the actual top that you make sure that you're matching the proper sleeve side. So you want to match the front sleeve to the front of the shirt, the upper sleeve to the front of the shirt, and the lower sleeve to the back of the shirt. And you'll know if it's off because if you reverse this and if I were to attach this part over here, it wouldn't match up properly. So it lets you know if you're doing it the proper way. And that is only if you use the proper seam allowance all the way around. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to insert the sleeves, both of the sleeves, then take it to the machine. Can you see this well? So again, this is the wrong side. We want to slide this in and attach the sleeves. And once you take it to the machine, you want to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so we have the sleeves connected to the front and the back, and now what we want to do, well, we also want to press the seam allowance. So you want to press the seam allowance open so it lays nice and flat. So now for the neck facing, you want to connect the neck facing using the notches Where are we at here? Right side to right side. And we want to stitch this using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you finish stitching this, go ahead and press the seam allowance open. And you could trim it a bit. I would say not very much, just kind of a tiny bit. And then go ahead and press the seam allowance open. So now what you want to do is attach the facing to the neck of the top. So what you're going to do is go ahead and match up the notches. And you want to do that with the right side facing the right side. So make sure when it is attached that the zipper is folded over like this. So when you sew it, so it depends on how you actually installed your zipper. So if you want your zipper to where you're going to do the hook and eye closure, then you want to sew 3/8 of an inch from the top. If you want your zipper to where it goes all the way to the top and you have no space and you don't need this closure, then you want to sew 5/8 of an inch. So we have the facing attached to the collar, and I went ahead and trimmed it as well as ironed the seam open. So what we want to do is go ahead and understitch. So I want to go ahead and stitch this part, not the actual fabric, not this part, not the fabric that you'll see, but the fabric that is attached to the inner facing. So we want to go ahead and this little thin line. That's why I told you not to trim it too thin, because you do need to stitch this. So we're going to go ahead. I need to press this out a bit more, but we're going to go ahead and stitch this. And then once you stitch it, go ahead and fold it over like this and iron it. Okay, so we've finished the neck. I've understitched right here at the zipper and then tacked down here the facing to the actual neck. So now the only thing that's left to do is to hem. So I would first try this on because the sleeves are very long. So what I'm going to do is just fold this under 2 inches because they are, again, very, very long. And I'm tall, so I can only imagine how much you'd have to fold it under. I do love a long sleeve, longer than normal, but I am going to go ahead and do 2 inches here. So I'm going to do 2 inches all the way around. And I'm going to fold this under 1 inch all the way around here and then stitch. And what I'm going to do is, because this is so long, I'm going to actually fold this under twice. So I'm going to do 1 inch twice. If not, it'll be a really big hem, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do 1 inch, I'm going to iron that down, and then I'm going to fold over 1 more inch. And then sew it using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So all the hemming is done, and we are pretty much complete. Now it just needs to go to the dry cleaner.